My name is Graham Hunter. I am the Director of Marketing at Patreon. Has anyone heard of Patreon? Okay, cool. For those of you who don't know, Patreon is the best way for digital content creators to get ongoing funding directly from their fans. The reluctant sort of like Uber for X description of us is, Kickstarter but monthly. I'm trying to change that internally. But yeah, so let's get started. Before we start, I just want to get a sense for like people's relationship to like community management. Basically, like, do people have existing user communities? Are you thinking about starting a community? Existing user communities. Okay, cool. And then what does that look like? Is this just social media? Is this an email list? Is this a forum?
It's social media differently and an email list. And we have a Slack community for our paid users.
Cool, love it. And then you raised your hand for something similar. So email, Slack, that type, social, okay. And anybody else who's got existing communities for their companies?
Yeah, actually, right now we have thousands of users who they use our app, and some of them are already writing about us. And what we're trying to do right now is to pay them to do one community blog, or they could write for us our own platform.
Okay, so got it. Is this like UGC in your user-generated content in your app, or they're doing?
It's not specifically for our app. It's just to drive protection, basically.
Okay, and then I'm sorry. What are your companies? Just 5-second thing.
Sorry, we're from the previous batch, but like we really want to hear your thoughts.
Okay, what's it like your industry type of a?
Well, we're adequately term designing code. We have like an app that's
Cool, and then you guys? Cool. I'm learning to play the guitar. And then you. I'm sorry. Your name?
Jack.
And your company? And what you do?
Connect fans together, conversations.
Cool. Cool. I'm sorry. Connect fans together. Sports teams. Okay. Great. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and so your co-working members are the community? Great. Okay, cool. You have a really cute logo. All right, so the first question, this is a pretty stereotypical presentation like format. It's going to be like, what is a community? Who needs community? How do I grow a community? Obviously, Seth Godin is the master community builder of all time. And his book, Tribes, is, I would call, like the community management Bible, right? It's basically like all the fundamental underlying principles of building a community, or what he would say, like leading a tribe of people. But essentially, you could replace tribe with community here. A community is a group of people connected to one another, connected to a leader, and connected to an idea. And if you're going to do this, like, just get this book and read it. It's awesome. Community management is, I try actually like not to use the word community management because it's kind of like been butchered by like Fortune 500 social media managers. To be like, well, we don't want to just be social media managers. We want to like manage a community of people. And you're like, what's up? And you're like, I'm sorry, there's not a community of people around Dan and Yogurt. Like, there's just not. Like, it's not something that group of people just love so much and share in common that they want to hang out in some sort of yogurt forum. And I'm sorry if the brand manager for Dannon is here. But so we just try and say all the time, like, community management is not just social media. I want to just jump into some good examples, and I could, probably name 100 more, but just some interesting ones that are in places that you probably wouldn't imagine. And so, does anybody know the Chive? Okay, they are a $100 million a year business. Did everyone know that? It's insane. They sold 1 million t-shirts on their blog. And the t-shirt sales that they made were not like, oh, it says keep calm and chive on, if people seen that, right? Like they bought the shirt because they like the brand, not because it's like a cool shirt that has something to do with something else, right? So like it was their monetization, and those t-shirt sales paid for outright for their office. Like they bought a building, with a slide that goes into a bar. So the Chive is an interesting thing, because if you are familiar with what kind of content's on the Chive, it's kind of like, it's like hot chicks and, like really trashy memes and guys getting kicked in the balls and like stuff like that. Something you wouldn't imagine a community forming around, to be like, yeah, I read that, like that type of thing. But before you knew it, when you hear the founders of the Chive talking about it, they said, it's crazy. The comments on our blog started like fostering really substantive conversations. And people would interact with each other and know each other's screen names and things like that, and address each other and be like, oh, hey, this person would think that this is interesting. I've had a previous conversation with them about a similar topic, or something like that, right? And then they started just saying chive on at the end as they like sign off their blog comments, right? And so the Chive isn't, to me, like when I see that, I'm not like, oh, there's a good place to have a community, right? But community is almost like the sole thing. In talking to the founders also, like they will admit, community is absolutely the thing that differentiated us from all the other like trashy websites online and allowed us to grow into like the community, the big site that we are today. These two, Rhett and Link and the Vlog Brothers, are YouTube channels. And like, I know it's easy to get into the habit of like looking at other startups and what they've done, and I'll definitely sort of like jump into some of those. But YouTube channels have like the most insane communities. Like, 14-year-old girls who beg their parents to fly with them to Orlando so that they can see their favorite YouTube star or whatever, and maybe you're a B2B company, right? And we'll talk about that too. But not just sort of like tweens, like these are, like I watch the Vlog Brothers. Is anybody fans of either the Vlog Brothers or Rhett and Link? Okay, 1, 2. Cool. So the Vlog Brothers are basically two brothers, and they made videos back and forth to each other every Tuesday or Thursday. Hello, John. Today's Tuesday. Blah blah blah. They talk about healthcare and the weather and comics and whatever they want. And they developed this massive following, and it came with a vocabulary, and people started self-identifying themselves as Nerdfighters. And they say, yeah, I'm a Nerdfighter, meaning I watch the Vlog Brothers. Rhett and Link had the exact same thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about sort of like this later. But Rhett and Link had a bunch of funny sayings that they'd say, and their fans called themselves mythical beasts. Quora and Product Hunt, I think, are good examples of online communities. And so like if you look at like the founding story of Product Hunt and how they got started, I mean, it started as like an email list, right? And so it's like a bunch of people who were product nerds who were just like wanted to know about the next iPhone app, and would have 8 email clients running on their phone at one time, and they just wanted to talk about it. And so they started an email list, and it turned into more like an email newsletter, which turned into a site, which, you know the story, right? Same thing, Quora, like 5 of the people who work with me at Patreon are like, oh, he's one of my Quora friends. Like literally, they'll invite people to the office. It's like, oh, this is my Quora friend. I'm like, if you can get an adjective in front of a friend, like, this is my croissant friend, you know what I mean? Like, just like winning. That is just winning, right? So, and there were these Quora power users early in the days of Quora that would just answer an insane number of questions, right? And they also developed this crazy game with deprecated Quora posts that, like, do people know about this? That, like, so there were only a certain number of like linked to posts from like Quora's directories and things like that. And so there would be these live pages that weren't linked to from anywhere on Quora, and search sucked back then, right? And so they would play this game where they like linked to it was like this sort of like Wikipedia style game. And there were forums about this game. Crazy, right? And so I think these companies have done a really great job sort of like fostering community, and most of it by accident. Like most of the good stories that we know about community and using community as like a, you know, competitive advantage or sort of like defensible thing that your company has that gives people affinity for what you're doing, all came by accident. I mean, Product Hunt's pretty close to sort of, you know, like architected, but like the Chive, like I don't think they had any idea what they were doing. So let's talk about a little bit about the tools of building a community, and apologies if this is too like, you know, remedial, but I think a lot of people like underestimate comments and how they work. And we can talk about like specific, you know, comment, whatever, discuss versus blah, 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 talk to me later. But I think that like the standard, oh, we wrote a blog post, add some, you know, oh, there's comments under there, you know. It's just underutilized and overlooked. Most people don't respond to the comments that happen like on their own blog, which this is from Import.io's blog. I really like, actually, if you check out growthhackers.com, how they do it is they have the title of, it's kind of like Reddit style, right? Where there's the title of a post and then the whole conversation about it. And if you want to read the post, you click into the post. And then it'll show you the post, and then you go back and continue the conversation. But this is from Import.io. I think the last speaker mentioned Import.io. But their blog is killer, and the comments here are a reflection of the community that they've built. And so, oh, hey, this is very cool. I have a question, blah, blah, blah. And then Andrew Fogg, who's actually one of the founders of Import, hey, let's go deeper on your question. Can you give me a little bit more information? What kind of blah, 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 right? Like, that's the kind of thing you want happening on your blog. It's also the kind of thing when you're like, yeah, move fast and break things, that you're like, I don't have time for comments. You know, like, I'm building a core product. And I think people forget that, like, these people are giving you a shot, and you, like, kind of don't deserve a shot a lot of the time. They're like, I'm putting up with a bunch of shit that's happening in your product just because I kind of like you and I want you to succeed and you're solving a problem, or maybe will solve a problem for me sometime in the future. Yeah, so this is Facebook, right? I think Facebook groups are great, and I think that they can be a cool user acquisition strategy also. My favorite way to sort of utilize Facebook communities is to start a closed generic community. And by generic, I mean not like Import.io users community. Like, this can be a Facebook group, but probably best for this to be a forum right off the bat, actually. But I would call it something like web scraping power users or something like that, right? And you start it as a closed community, and you invite everyone to, you know, this web scraping thought leaders community or whatever it is, right? And then you just try and facilitate the best and most meaningful conversation. Asking and answering people's questions, right? You know, just all the normal like engagement stuff that you want to see. And then you open it up to be like an approval basis. And so like, and maybe you have some posts that are visible or pinned or whatever. And then before you know it, people just start kind of like applying to be in your like approval-based group, right? And you let them in slowly, right? Because you want, sorry, I'm like referencing things that I haven't explained yet. There's a great analogy. I used to run a dance, swing dance. And there's a really great analogy for community management. And so you want to accept the people who fit your values, and you want to reject anybody else, right? Exclusion is like one of the most powerful like parts of community. For example, like the last speaker was talking about, like developers want to talk to people who understand their needs. They don't want to be marketed to or sold to. So if they show up at a place and everybody's like, this is a place for developers, and there's a person there who's just like selling, you're going to be like, yeah, don't talk to that guy, right? And guess what? That guy's not going to have a great time, and he's probably not going to come back. He's like, yeah, it didn't really work. You know, they didn't want to talk to me. I didn't have a good time. So I'm not going to go there again. And guess what? Their community is intact. And so like the dance analogy is kind of like, we would have some people come to this dance, right? And they were like, yeah, I'm here to meet chicks, and you know, I'm gonna whatever. And they were kind of creepy and things like that. And there was that same type of vibe, right? You'd be like, yeah, don't dance with that guy. He's just kind of like, it's kind of weird, you know? And no one would dance with that person. And then they wouldn't have a good time, and then they wouldn't come back. But we wanted to be welcoming. We wanted anybody to be able to try our community on, right? So anyone can come, try the community on. And if you seem like a genuine great person who's here to have fun and dance and all that, we're gonna welcome you with open arms. And if not, our like, essentially like our like antibodies, like our immune system, the immune system is meant to protect the integrity of the community, right? Will reject you. And it's important to have that. And so that's essentially like what I'm talking about here, that principle, right? You're gonna allow people into the community. And as they like participate in conversations and contribute and things like that, you're gonna say, is this the type of community I want? And you're gonna, you know, allow them to be there or kick them out. And the curation of that community is one of the most important parts of fostering the, what I would call like the integrity of the community, right? I mean, and I'm not talking about like trolls and people who are like, you know, like making obviously shitty comments. I'm talking about like people who just ask questions and take, or, you know, people who like just sort of like aren't super positive or whatever, anything like that. And you don't really need an explanation. You're just like, yeah, it's just not a fit, you know? So let's keep going on tools. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that? Does that resonate with people?
In the beginning, you were talking about creating a generic open community and then eventually close it and people apply.
Sorry, create a closed community so that you can start getting the conversation going, so that no one wants to show up to an empty thing. It's like the reason most blog posts have 0 comments is because I don't want to be the first person to leave a comment, right? And then you open up so that I can apply to be in the group. You click join, and it's like pending approval. And then you can go through and approve 5 people at a time and see if they participate well. Sorry, did you have?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
so get to that point.
Yeah.
So now you've got a generic, non-branded community. Do you have a couple of the next steps after that, or that you're managing that outside your brand?
Yeah, well, I would manage that outside your brand. Oh, I'm sorry. So the question is, what are the next steps after you would start a generic community to sort of like pull those people into your product and brand and things like that, right? So in the example of Import.io, you know, probably one of the things that you're going to share in that community is going to be content. And the content that you share can, like, obviously you don't want it to be exclusively from your brand. It just seems like a shill, you know what I mean? Like a shell for, this is just a front for me trying to like get you to use X, Y, and Z. But obviously, if it's really valuable information, including your brand there is not out of the, is not, it's still aligned with the value that you're providing the group. And so I would say that the thing you do with generic groups is content curation, and some of that content can be your content. Does that make sense?
Does what you're talking through apply in parallel to LinkedIn? So if we're
Apply to
more
LinkedIn.
B2B world, selling to large financial service companies and customers, so I'm thinking through who our buyers are, and Facebook's probably not around much of
Yeah.
I've seen communities and groups on LinkedIn, and it's really
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it's like, yes, yes. Does this apply to LinkedIn as much as it applies to Facebook? For example, B2B companies who would probably use LinkedIn rather than Facebook. So LinkedIn has been, so something like web scraping on Facebook, right? There's probably not 50 web scraping groups. There's probably like 5 that have any number of users in them or something like that. And so there's this fracturing that happens. But with LinkedIn, the number of B2B companies and there aren't, maybe if you're like CMOs of Internet of Things companies, like if you're trying to target that specific of a person, I would say you can start a generic group and moderate it and sort of like be the sort of leader of this group. But most people are just trying to reach like the VP of sales at any financial services company, and there are hundreds of those groups, and like, yeah, LinkedIn groups, totally.
The more explained, there's 20,000 lenders, another 20,000 brokers. There's so many groups on LinkedIn already.
Yeah.
That have thousands of hundreds of members.
Yeah, and you're like, what am I going to start another group exactly like that, right?
And a lot of them are just, I monitor them, and there's not a lot of value being added by them.
Exactly.
It's like, how do we
That's
create what
that's
we do?
beautiful. So to answer your question, and I think this is valuable to everybody, not just like answering his specific question. I hope throw your hand up if you want to move on. I don't know. Is to say, so is anybody on the 500Distro list? Okay, is that badass or what? It's freaking awesome. Like any question you have answered by like Brian Balfour's on that list. Like he jumps in there and just like answers people's questions. And that's crazy because like LinkedIn groups are sort of this like devolved thing of everybody just selling to each other. They're like, no, look at my company, no, look at my company, right? And so the question that you need to like come back to is like, what is the value that people get from community? Generically, and then specifically for this, like basically it's like product work, you know what I mean? It's like user research. It's like, okay, what is the value that what are the problems that these people have in their business, and how would a community solve that? If that's the case, they don't want to join any LinkedIn groups because they're like turned off by it. You're like, okay, LinkedIn is out. What about email? What about Slack? How many people should we start with that, are there thought leaders in the space that people know? Are there second tier people that people know that you could maybe like get access to a little more easily? Could you start with 15 of them and just say, hey, I want to blah, 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 and I want to get all of you together to help solve your problems and this and that. But you can't do that unless you're one of them.
And do we put
Right.
them on as evangelists of us? So they're kind of our cheerleaders in that sense, where they need to be, we got to put them on someone, us, little startup, if we don't think who we are, or is it, no, just because you're built your brand as a thought leader in this vertical, you want to.
Great. So the underlying question is like, how much a part of the conversation do we try and make ourselves? Is that it? Got it. So, and this is like similar to, was it your question or yours? Yeah. Yeah. I would say that it depends on what you're going for, right? Like this, like I am a power user of Import.io, like top 1% probably. And I speak at their conference, and I like do all these things, right? And so like I'm interested in the Import.io power user community. I also like do web scraping other ways, like And maybe I'll participate in some other communities that are just like, yeah, web scraping, you know, like cool. So it depends on what you're going for, right? I would say that most people who want to do something like this want to, are companies that have really technical products and, you know, users who are running into all sorts of problems. Like, import is not great, like a lot of the time, but it's the very best that's out there. And so everyone's just like, this is amazing for what it is. You know, there are some bugs and, you know, that happens and whatever, but everyone's so dedicated to it. Everyone loves it so much. It's a great community of people, all this stuff. So I would say, like, it depends on your brand, yeah, your objective. For you specifically, I would say don't do a power user community. Do a, like, you know, like professional group where blah, 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 you know? And maybe meetups and in person is like the way to go, right?
You know, there's a way you can kind of spin the startup community on that as well. So we actually started a RegTech startup community on LinkedIn. And we
I'm sorry, a what?
Regulatory technology.
Okay.
So we started a RegTech community on LinkedIn, and I reached out to other CEOs in the RegTech community from all over the world, and got started that way. And now we're just getting people pinging us, like you said, reaching out and wanting to be part of the group. And that's kind of how we started.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's a great place to be if you serve something that's a sufficient niche, right? There were probably no RegTech like groups pre-existing, right? But for someone who like is in the mortgage industry, you're gonna be like, yeah, mortgage tech. You know, it's like there's probably thousands of mortgage executive groups on LinkedIn or whatever, and they all kind of suck. And so you just kind of, even though there's already something out there, got to make something new. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question. The question was, oh, I think it was a comment. Sort of saying, hey, we did that same thing for the RegTech industry. Was that it, or did you have a question?
Yeah, I think just as a suggestion, just kind of
Yeah.
put like a startup spin on it, and just get other, you know, leaders, other CEOs in the same sort of space. But if you're actually leading it, then you can kind of lead the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the live stream, it was putting the comment was, doesn't matter. Across communities, putting a startup spin on it. So you're saying, hey, founders of startups in the clean tech industry, in the this industry, and that industry type of a thing. Because that can be smaller than something that, you know, like fintech startups versus just like mortgage lending in general or something like that, right?
I mean, the interesting thing about that, though, is that we're not having participation, so we're not having to see
Yeah.
having participation going on.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to open our world up to these other startups.
Competitors, yeah,
Time,
for sure.
We're very guarded about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of find that balance. I think great gaining insights and building community, and not letting our competitors say, on our community, hey, check out what these guys are doing. There's this person right here, maybe down. There's this person, you know, they're all interested. Give them a call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's like a community is a long-term play, right? And so like if you as a salesperson or like as a marketing person are sort of like looking at community, be like, there's people joining. Oh, they're perfect. You know what I mean? And sort of like, let's call them up. You know, if you're gonna call them up and say, hey, I just want to like make sure that you like get what we're all about in this community. What we're all about is sort of like providing value to each other and supporting each other in this long-term way. I work for, you know, mortgage tech company, and we do all sorts of things. I'm sure you'll hear about it later. But you see what I did there? It's like I'm not selling them. Yeah, totally. Let's keep rolling. So this is just a sort of like online resources portal that Import.io has, where it says, hey, we've got a Facebook community, we've got all sorts of questions and answers, and we do things on Twitter. This is good to have, just sort of like it's almost like a community landing page that tells them where they can participate. It's just like people want to be told what to do and then take the next step if they want to participate. This is discourse. Love, love, love Discourse. It's basically WordPress it's like the equivalent WordPress is to blogs as Discourse is to forums. It's open source. It's free if you host it. I sincerely hope that all of you have the technical know-how to do this. And it's not ugly like forums used to be. It's awesome. And this is the Import.io, power users, Discourse community. There's all sorts of feedback, there's questions, all sorts of things. This is Chive Nation. So I mentioned the Chive before. Chive Nation is a chapter-based organization of meetups. And people in, I think, 50 cities in the United States meet up with other Chivers and hang out and actually do awesome things. It's like associated with Chive Charities, which is a big piece of the Chive. And so they like do some meetup around a Chive charity and actually all meet up and wear green and stuff like that. It's out of control the amount of community that they've built on sort of like a foundation that you would imagine would not foster community. And so this is just sort of like using either like meetup.com or like they've essentially built their own meetup.com, which is like, hey, meet other Chivers near you. So now moving on to the like fundamental building blocks of community. And so I'd say shared experience is one of the main fundamental building blocks of community. You hear about people, they get trapped in a mine, now they're best friends, right? You hear about, it's the reason that online communities, work, right? It's like, I'm in this CMO breakfast thing that Autopilot does. Autopilot is a marketing automation software. It's like 10 times better than Marketo. It's awesome. And I go to this like CMO breakfast, and I'm like, these people are probably facing similar marketing challenges to me, right? That's the similarity that like keeps us together. And one of the building blocks of community. So similarity and exclusion is essentially the dance analogy that I made before, right? So it's we all have something in similar, something in common. And if a person sort of like comes, and that can be values, and that can be, have you ever seen a person with a Kawasaki riding with a bunch of Harley riders? No, never, right? Because why would they do that? Harley represents the rebel spirit of America. And Kawasaki is like, but it's really fuel efficient. And they're like, we don't care about fuel efficiency, okay? This is about damn the man. This is about, like that type of thing, right? They're a community of people, and they will like wear leather vests, and they put their patches on it. And I don't know a whole ton about that, but it's the same thing at work in everything, right? It's similarities that bond them together. And they're open to having new people come in. There's a whole like initiation process for bike gangs and new members and things like that. But if you don't share our values, then you're not welcome. And that, I think, is a thing that people don't understand a lot because they feel like they want to, quote, welcome any customer. Like if a person shows up, just their attention is an opportunity. And I just want to respect them and like, all that stuff. And that's true, but like not in community management, right? Like people are welcome here who share our values and want to participate. And if you don't, then you should leave. And obviously it's hard to say that to like, quote unquote potential customers. Many-to-many relationships. So community is not, I see a lot of people try to start communities from scratch. And one of the biggest mistakes that they make is that they think that people are there in the community to talk to them. People are there to talk to each other and you. Right? And so the worst thing that you can do is like, I was talking about comments, jump in and respond to every person's comment as if they're talking to only you, right? Or, anyone asks a question, you jump in and answer it because you want to answer it. Hold back. let the community like respond, and then you say, hey John, thanks so much for being like a good member of the community and answering that question. Here's some additional information if both of you want to check it out on our like help desk or whatever it is, right? So hanging back, letting the community interact with each other before you sort of like step in, so that it's a many-to-many relationship, not a one-to-many. Same thing is true of social media, right? Like, someone's going to @mention you on Twitter asking a question. Wouldn't it be great if your users were the ones that are sort of like stepping up to the plate on how to do that, instead of just, you're filing support tickets that get answered on Twitter, right? Like, foster the many-to-many relationship, not the one-to-many. Same thing with social media and content, right? Like, you're like, oh, we're gonna write content, or we're gonna curate content, and then we're just gonna, send it to our people that are listening. It's like, I have a megaphone, and in the megaphone's Twitter, and I'm gonna send you stuff, and then just read it and be happy about it, okay? That's one-to-many. That's like, I'm using social media like a megaphone. That's fine, but that's not community, I mentioned this a little bit, but the fact that a vocabulary is developing in a community is like a really solid sign of like the community's health itself, right? So don't forget to be awesome, or DFTBA, is the like acronym of the Vlogbrothers. And so they'll sign off every video. Don't forget to be awesome. Don't forget to be awesome. Don't forget to be awesome. And you know what? Like, eventually someone who watches all the videos is gonna say, don't forget to be awesome, and think of you, right? And, or, I've even seen like a dating profile, and at the bottom it says DFTBA. And if you know what that means, then we're like tight, right? Like, I respect other fans of the Vlogbrothers, right? And so the fact that like vocabulary would develop around your community is like something that's really positive, right? Chive on, same thing, right? And then one like level of granularity deeper would be self-identification. And so self-identification is like the ultimate success of a community. When a person like calls themselves a noun that is a member of your community. So when I say like chiver, like, oh yeah, I'm a chiver. That's the biggest win a community manager could ever have, right? When you consider like when I say like I'm a dancer, I mean like swing dancer. And other swing dancers are like, oh, I'm a dancer. And if a person's like, oh, I'm a dancer too, and we're like, oh, what kind of dance do you do? They're like, oh, I do like salsa. We're like, or I do ballet or something like that. We're like, oh, you're a real dancer. There's real dancers and there's dancers. And it's just this stupid like vocabulary of self-identification that we're like, oh, social dancers are dancers, and then people who do like things that require training, that's like real dancing, And so people have this same type of thing. So I mentioned like mythical beasts. These are like, they made badges of these, and to good community members, they'd send them out being like, congratulations, you are a mythical beast. And you're like, awesome. And then guess what? You say that to other people. You go, yeah, I'm a mythical beast, And they go, what does that even mean? You're like, don't worry about it, dude. You probably don't get it. Down here at the bottom, right, DFTBA, don't forget to be awesome. Nerdfighters, they have this, can't even do it, they do this Star Trek thing like that, very gangster. And they call themselves Nerdfighters, and so they're like, oh yeah, I'm a Nerdfighter, right? That self-identification of a word is really powerful. Like someone's like raising their hand and being like, that brand, I like them, and I am one of them. And so one way that you can help to build communities more effectively is to sort of like tee these up. Like, Chiver and Chive On was developed by the community. It wasn't architected, right? But Nerdfighter and Don't Forget to Be Awesome, that's architected, right? They said, and they call their channel Nerdfighteria or whatever, like, just like nerdiness to the max, and people love it, right? And so they said, they architected Don't Forget to Be Awesome and Nerdfighter, right? And so they told people that if you're here, you are a Nerdfighter. And you go, all right, whatever you say, dude, you know? And so that's the type of thing that you can do. So like, what is your community called? That's really important. What is a member of the community? It's similar to the verb Google. You know, oh, Google it. Being it doesn't really have the same ring to it, you know? Or not just because it's less popular, because yeah, let me Alta Vista that. You know, that's not a verb, you know? And so obviously that's not like the reason for Google's success, but like what you call the people who are members and the you know, the vocabulary that surrounds your community is like really important. It can be like architected. Questions? Yeah.
So you spoke about the many-to-many relationship. Now, how do you deal with that in the beginning, right? When the conversations are just kind of dragging around for some community, somebody posts something, like, go by and nobody posts something.
Sure.
How do you kind of keep pushing the conversation along, encouraging organic community engagement?
So the question is, how do you encourage organic community engagement when engagement is low? So a couple things. I would say that starting with smaller, more engaged communities and allowing that to grow. So like, there's a reason that like Product Hunt didn't allow anybody to post anything to Product Hunt for a long time, right? Like still, I think you have to be like approved. I don't actually know, whatever. Still, I think you have to be approved to post something. And so like I get emails like 2 emails a week asking me to post something to Product Hunt. You know, it's just like, hey man, can you post our thing? And I'm like, sure, whatever, you know. And so smaller communities of more engaged people. Smaller doesn't equal more engaged. You know, just find the people that are so passionate about it that they like want to spend 4 hours a week like answering Quora questions. That analogy to your product, right? Your croissant? Okay. Like co-working evangelists. Like I don't just do co-working so that I can get my work done. I think that co-working is a movement that I would like to be a part of. You know what I mean? Like in 20 years, 90% of the workforce will be co-working. Like that person who's like that should be the first members of the community, right? You're like community member dating. You know, you're like looking for those people that will come in and just like have this thing. Because as a new person and I step in, and that's what I find, a room essentially full of people who are just like really intense about it, I'm like, whoa, I didn't know how much I cared about this. Because this is really interesting and blah, blah, blah. The other thing is just from a technical perspective, like sending people transactional emails and push notifications and like things like that that encourage engagement, like use an engagement metric, right, of like days until response or, you know, something like that, and just sort of like get people to respond, or you jump in and mention somebody else. You know who's amazing at that is Sandy McPherson of Quib. I don't know, is Quib still going on? Okay. Quib's still going? Okay, cool. I'm sure Quib is like professional, like conversations about content. So it's like, yeah, content's cool, but it's a dime a dozen when you share it. Sandy will say she knows so many people, and she knows who's interested in what, and she'll just mention you like, hey, I know you're into this. What do you think? Done. Someone directly calls you out and asks you what you think on something, you're not going to respond? Like, no, of course you're going to respond, you know? Yeah, and so I would say that. Are we cool for one more question, or? It's 45 right now.
Is that a voting question?
Okay, one.
One more question.
Yeah.
About events.
Great.
Real briefly about Chive Nation.
Mhm.
Can you talk deeper about other examples where events are effective?
Sure. I mean, like, you know, why do people start? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you tell me more about events? What makes an effective event? Is that the question? Great. What makes an effective event? I would say the exact same thing that makes an effective online community, right? It's who comes, right? And so if you're going to throw a hackathon or something like that, you're like, yeah, because we want to, meet developers and get to know them and be a part of the community. And maybe there's this like internet of like, oh, we are, driven or whatever, like Internet of Things, but for cars, or maybe you have a niche, right? Or hackathon for charities or whatever it is. Like the worst thing you could do is just sort of like put it up and like, let's say you sold 100 tickets or RSVPs or whatever, and people showed up. Like no curation whatsoever. Like have 20 people who are super passionate about this, who you know because you're in the community already. That's why you know them, and just be like, I'm doing this thing. If it was on February 2nd, would you come? Because you are really like, oh my gosh, you're, and maybe they're speakers and maybe blah, blah, blah. But having them be there as a participant in the community is like the most important part. They're the seed, right? The what you start the online community with, those people. Make sense? Cool, thank you guys.